Welcome to Digital Journeys, the podcast from Terry Beckert that explores how technology is transforming business optimization. Each episode, we unpack the latest trends, strategies, and innovations that are driving efficiency and growth in today's fast-paced digital landscape. Join us as we navigate the path to smarter, more agile business practices.
Hi, everyone. This is Jerry Herden with Terry Beckert, and today joining me on Digital Journeys is Greg Kopp, who is also with Terry Beckert. He came over from Archer Point not too long ago, and he has started a fantastic series called AI Over 40, and he has it on LinkedIn, and he's getting a lot of impressions. A lot of people are commenting on this series, so we thought we would do a podcast on it. So, Greg, just would like for you to introduce yourself and tell the listeners a little bit about you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jerry. So I actually celebrated my 1-year anniversary at Terry Beckert just this last week. So October 9th marked 1 year.
Oh, congratulations.
So, yeah, it's been great being here. So I'm a partner here at Terry Beckert. I lead the Microsoft ERP practice, and we focus on Business Central for the mid-market. And as you mentioned, I started this series called AI for the Over 40. And part of it, I just was feeling frustrated. I knew AI was transformational, and I just didn't feel like I was being transformed. So I finally decided, okay, I can't be the only one feeling this. So I was in a meeting with a bunch of other business leaders from different companies, and I asked the question. I said, we're all talking about how AI is going to change the world, change our jobs, change our colleagues and employees' jobs, but how has it changed your job? And not a single person in the room could tell me anything about how it changed their jobs. The best we got was, well, I use it to summarize email. It helps me fill out an RFP. I use it to help create presentations. I said, okay, that's a far cry from the transformation we hear being talked about every day where AI is going to replace us all. So I realized for myself, and I think for the other leaders in the room, we needed to start with personal transformation before we could even pretend to talk about how AI was going to transform our work, our lives, our coworkers. So that was where AI for the Over 40 was born.
Interesting. So let me ask you, the over 40 part, of course, I'm going to be 35 years old forever, Greg. So, and I actually think this could be AI for any age, your series, to be honest with you. I think there's just so much knowledge in this series, but what was the hook for over 40?
My son, who is a junior at the University of Minnesota studying data science and computer science, I realized, I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up playing video games, but I wouldn't call myself a digital native the same way that I would call my son and daughter digital natives. So I felt like, as I talked to my son and my adult daughter, the way they view technology is different. Even though I feel like I'm pretty well versed in technology, there's still something that a fundamental difference in how we approach it. And part of it for me is, I don't know about you, Jerry, but when I try to do anything on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, it feels like an unnatural act. And so
Yeah, I agree.
but that's where my kids and, I'm sure your kids live. It's like, wow, when did I get old? So part of the reason for the over 40 was just acknowledging that there was probably a little bit of a difference in how you and I might be approaching this transformative technology than, our college age and younger kids. Now it's funny, my daughter accused me of lacking journalistic integrity. I said, excuse me? What do you mean? She goes, Dad, I mean, let's be fair. You should have titled this series For the Well Over 50. I was like, well, now that's just hurtful. But, I felt like for the over 40, that's the tail end of Gen X. But I do agree. I think we're all facing very similar challenges as we try to figure out how to embrace this transformative technology. But I also just was kind of looking for a hook that would get people to look twice.
Sure.
So there we go.
There you go. All right. Well, it was a good hook. So you've written several of these articles now and posted those on LinkedIn. And we're just going to look at the first few that you've done. So the week one, you mentioned in it that you've been chasing the AI dragon for years. What do you mean by this?
Well, so my sense was, Tesla's been around for a while, and you look at what AI has done for self-driving cars, and you go, okay, if it can do that, and who would have ever thought you could have a self-driving car? That's got to be transformative for the type of work we do. So I decided in 2019 to go back for my MBA, and my wife questioned my sanity. She's like, so exactly what is this going to accomplish for you? You can't really be promoted because you run your business. You're not looking to switch jobs. But honestly, there were a couple of reasons. One was I wanted to see if I could do it. It'd always been a dream of mine. But the other big reason was I wanted to get a better understanding of what AI was doing. And I figured no better place to do it than head off to Kellogg in Chicago and spend some time learning more about AI. This was right before COVID, so 2019. And, graduated in 21. And I would say at that point, we're still, in the realm of machine learning. And so it's not really translatable yet to what we're seeing today. And so, I came away somewhat disappointed, feeling like, okay, I spent all this time and money to go learn more about AI. And I kind of understand machine learning in a way I didn't before, but how do I translate that? Because I'm not a data scientist. I have no desire to be. So I then went to 2023 is when ChatGPT came out. And I don't know what your experience with it was initially, but I played around with it, and it seemed like the only thing I saw people doing was, oh, look, I can make this sound like Dr. Seuss.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, awesome, sure. But between the serious hallucinations with the initial models and just kind of struggling, what are the real use cases here? I kind of decided, well, I can see how someday this is going to be amazing, but I don't think it is quite yet. So then, fast forward to this year, and now being a part of Cherry Beckert, well, now one of my big challenges is trying to figure out forecasting. And I was like, okay, this is the first challenge I faced where I know AI has to be able to help me with this. And that's where that kind of forced me back into evaluating where the models had come from 2023, or I guess it was late 2023 to early 2025, and seeing the progress was astounding. And so, yeah, from there, it's just been a journey of discovery. And honestly, now from where I was back at the early part of this year to where I feel like I am now, I can't imagine doing what I do without using AI.
Yeah. I agree with you, Greg. I remember when I first started using Chat GPT, first of all, I couldn't remember what even the name of it, right? I kept getting that confused. And then for me, it was almost Google on steroids with,
Mm-hmm.
and that was the wrong way to look at it as well. So
Right.
I definitely have evolved too with my use of it. And, it kind of reminds me of, I'm Gen X. So it kind of reminds me of, back in the 90s when the internet was just kind of becoming popular and people were talking
Yeah.
about it. And it's like, how do we use this internet? What is it? And to me, this almost feels like the same thing. Would you agree with that?
Oh, I would definitely agree, and I'd say it is that on steroids. The pace of um, how these models are evolving and progressing is just astonishing. And so where I feel like, in the early days of the internet, I'm sure you're like me, where on a dial-up modem, there was only so much you could accomplish.
Yeah.
So it it took a while for the infrastructure to get to a place where the promise of the internet, we could really start to realize it. Now, when we look at, I think, what people are calling the great AI build out, with the infrastructure around data centers, electricity production, it is astonishing. I heard a stat where they're talking about the amount of money that's going to be spent in this coming fiscal year on the AI build out is more than we spent on an adjusted basis for the entire US highway network.
Wow.
So it is astonishing the amount of money that is invested now. But that also means the pace at which things are able to evolve is, I think, faster than anything we've seen in our lifetime.
Wow. Yeah. Absolutely. That's pretty amazing, and what the future holds with this. What is AI not? You kind of touched on what it is, but what is it
Mhm.
not?
Well, I think, and this is one of the things I addressed in that first article, and you brought it up too. I was treating AI like Google. You go into your chat, you ask it a question, you get back a pretty awful response initially. And then I'd give up and go, okay, this is terrible. I'll come back when the responses get better. But it wasn't until I stuck with it where I realized, okay, I'm thinking of this like Google, I'm thinking of it like a search engine. And unless I get back kind of the perfect result, which I'm expecting from what I'm assuming is just a new and improved search engine, then I'm disappointed. It wasn't until I realized, okay, I need to engage these models in an ongoing conversation. The more context I provide, the better the responses get. And that's where I started to have a breakthrough. I mean, my favorite example was talking to another business leader, and he goes, "Oh my gosh, AI is terrible." He said, "Can you believe AI can't even solve a simple math problem?" Well, at this point, I'd done enough where I understood the challenge he was having. And I said, "Okay, so what role did you ask it to play?" He goes, "What do you mean, what role?" I said, "Did you just type in a math problem and expect it to act like a calculator?" Well, yeah. And that, to me, the key insight was realizing that AI is like improv. It'll play whatever role you ask it. So if you don't give it a role, you're going to get a random role. So if you ask AI to just solve a math problem, it might be doing it in the role of a second grader or an infant or somebody who doesn't even know what the math problem is. So I had told him, I said, why don't you go back and ask the model to solve this math problem like a mathematician? And I said, I'm pretty sure you'll get the right answer. And sure enough. But he thought it was so crazy that he had to tell it what role to play. But that's what it is. It is, you have to tell it what role to play. It's like improv, where we the big question for me, or the other breakthrough, was I kept when I kept thinking of AI like Google, I expected an exact response, the same response every time. But when you think of AI as improv, it's all about an interaction, an ongoing interaction. And
Sure.
it's always about the idea that you see in improv called yes and. It's about continuing the conversation. And so I realized, okay, context is everything. And it's not that AI is all knowing, but if I ask it to play a certain role, it will mimic that role or that context in a way that begins to look like understanding. If I ask it to be a comedian, even though AI doesn't understand what funny is, it'll sound funny. If I ask it, to play the role of a data scientist, it will give me insights that look a lot like it understands data science. But it's this whole idea of how do you predict the next word in a way that conveys context and meaning when the model itself doesn't really understand what that context and meaning represents. It just knows how to predict. So sorry, there's probably a combination, Jerry, of both what it is and what it's not, but that's kind of the insights that help me get my own personal breakthrough.
I agree with you, and for me, it's a conversation and with AI, and that's kind of strange, right? I mean, when I
Yeah.
first started having a conversation with AI, but that's how I treat it. I ask it questions. I disagree with it. I, give my own opinion, and it's just interesting. It will come back and it'll come back and say, well, that's an interesting perspective. Well, have you thought about this? Or, and I'm just like, this is crazy. I'm having a conversation with AI.
But it is what my my wife accused me of you know having more meaningful conversations with my AI than I was having with her. And I was like, well, my AI is pretty affirming. Now that being said, I've also had to realize that what they call sycophantic AI doesn't always serve us well.
Sure.
So now with these latest models, with Chat GPT 5, Claude Sonnet 4.5, they've really begun to address both hallucinations and kind of the sycophantic responses. But it's funny, I went from kind of in Claude Opus 4.1 to Sonnet 4.5, where no matter how hard I tried to get the model to be critical, it was still pretty darn affirming. when I went to Sonnet 4.5, it was like, well, seriously, Greg, you should think about this more. I supply more context. And literally, it felt like all I was getting was, is that the best you can do, Greg? Where I finally had to say, okay, you know what? Yes, it is the best I can do. So I'm just done. So okay, fine.
That's great. So you talked a little some about some of these different platforms. You start going down that road, and that's really what your week two blog is about. And you talk about how you examine Claude, Chat GPT, and Gemini, and Microsoft Pilot. Um, Honestly, I never heard of Claude, and I have Claude on my iPhone now. That's my favorite
Oh
out
yeah.
of all of them. But that was the first time I ever heard of it. Whenever you mentioned it, but can you talk about maybe some strengths and weaknesses of each platform, or just maybe overall which one you like the best and why?
Yeah, so it was interesting because when I originally started this journey, it was all about how can I do better forecasting? Because one of the things that I'm required to do every 30 days here at Cherry Beckert is update my 90-day rolling forecast. And I was struggling. And I went to my son, like I said, who works, in computer science and data science. And he said, Dad, are you trying to do this all in Copilot? I was like, yep. He said, you need to experiment with some of the other models. And that was really eye-opening because it's kind of like trying to hit a moving target. But what I saw at the time was, for what I was trying to do, Claude was far better at helping me think and reason through the problem I was trying to solve. At the time, ChatGPT was better than any of the other alternatives for being able to take an Excel file, extract the data that I wanted out of the Excel file, and then transform it based on the instructions I was providing. And then Gemini continues to be my go-to for any kind of almost like I would say anything that I might have Googled in the past, I now do in Gemini. Because in terms of, Google, their expertise in indexing the information of the world, the internet, I just always feel like I get better responses from Gemini when it comes to trying to figure something out that basically requires, searching the internet or knowledge base or whatever. I still feel like, especially in Claude, you often have to remind it that it can even access the internet. So it'll
Hmm.
it'll be like, oh, I don't know the answer to that. And
Interesting.
it'll be like, okay, remember you can access the internet. Oh yeah, I can. That's a good point. Um, and then, forever, for a long time, ChatGPT, just in terms of manipulating Excel files, excelled. Now Claude, especially with their latest release, Sonnet 4.5, they've significantly leapfrogged even the ChatGPT 5 in my estimations, based on things I've tried to get the models to do. What surprised me with Copilot, and it's where I ran my version of what I called the AI Olympics. I ran all the models against each other, asked them to, produce an output based on the same set of instructions. I then asked them to grade each other, and it surprised me that all the models graded Claude the best. I then asked all the models to improve their own responses based on, the output they had from all the other models, and they did. And I figured if I had them all regrade themselves, they'd all be nearly identical. That was not true. They still all ranked Claude the best, Gemini and ChatGPT close second, or tied for second, and then Copilot still distant third or fourth, however you want to say that. So, well, that really got me thinking, why is it that Copilot is significantly behind ChatGPT, especially because it's all built on ChatGPT? And that's where I learned an important thing that talks about how the more fine tuning you do to a model, you risk what they call catastrophic forgetting. And that was the key insight that helped me understand Microsoft has done a lot to optimize ChatGPT, or at the time, now they've also inked a deal with Anthropic, but at the time it was all about ChatGPT. They've done a lot of refinement on top of ChatGPT to make it work really well with the Microsoft Office suite and the rest of the Microsoft stack. In so doing, it doesn't function nearly as well as a general purpose LLM like Claude or ChatGPT or Gemini. Now it's getting better. They've, from some of the recent experiments I've done, the gap is not as large, although it's still fairly large when trying to use Copilot as a general LLM. But, I would say Claude is still my go-to, especially now with Sonnet 4.5. The one thing that kills me though with Claude, ChatGPT, and Copilot, where Gemini shines, and it's actually when I talk to my son, he's like, why do you even use the others? Why don't you just use Gemini? And it all comes down to the context window. So Claude in your normal, web subscription is a 200,000 token limit, where Gemini is 1 million. ChatGPT is even a little less than 200,000. And it wasn't until recently, with some of the stuff that I've been doing around forecasting, where I started bumping up against that 200,000 token limit with Claude. And it was frustrating trying to figure out how to get past that limit and not lose key context for what I was trying to accomplish. So I've now figured out how to do that, which was part of my week 13 article. But that was 2 days of what I call token hell. But
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I actually read that article as well, and not jumping too far ahead, but yeah, I know that gets very costly as well.
It did initially until I figured out how to use something called prompt caching, because I went from, a $20 a month subscription to, in a few hours I'd blown through $20. I was like, oh, okay. If I don't figure out what I'm doing here, this could get extremely costly.
Yeah, for sure. We'll definitely have to touch on that in a future podcast. Um, so, in your week 3 article or blog, we've already covered really a lot of the things that you talked about in week 3. I guess one of my questions would be, and your week 3 was around using search engines and improv actor approaches and tips for having conversations with AI. But I guess one of my questions would be, do you still use Google for anything? Why would we use Google? I mean, what are there still some advantages to using Google over AI?
Well, so no, honestly, I don't. I don't use Google search for anything, um, which is surprising. Now, it's also a little scary because if I think about how we built our business, a lot of how we built our business was based on paid search with Google AdWords at the time. And so this whole idea of how the internet economy is going through a fundamental restructuring with, now obviously Google has Gemini. And if you do Google search, obviously the Gemini results pop up at the top now.
Yeah,
But still, I don't. I find I don't need all the ad clutter. So I go into Gemini, I ask my question, I get my response. Um, and then the great thing too is, a lot of the things I do, I initially I was concerned about having Gemini or Claude or ChatGPT save my history. But now I can't imagine functioning without it. It's almost like a second brain where I know at some point I was looking for, something related to a particular topic. Having all of that past context available to the model when I go in and search is huge.
sure.
And but yeah, I don't go to Google search anymore for anything.
Yeah, that's interesting. And you're not the only one I've heard that from. I still use it from time to time, but I find myself even more and more, using Claude or Chat GPT, or
Yep.
usually my go-tos. At least that's what I have on my iPhone and iPad.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
so far, Greg, you've written 13 of these blogs, and are you going to be writing one a week? Are you planning on 52 of these, or what are your plans?
Jerry, like most great ideas, when you have them, you're like, oh, this is going to be super easy.
Yeah,
I got so many ideas. The creative juices are flowing. Yeah, I'm going to commit to a 52-week series. Well, I can tell you, as especially coming into week 13, I'm like, wow, this is getting harder.
sure,
I think that the thing too, it's not that there isn't a lot that can be said. The harder part is wanting to say something that isn't already being said everywhere else. So I have felt like each week I've tried to tackle some new challenge for myself that then, what I'm communicating through this blog series is just my own personal evolution, my own journey, my own learnings. And the technology is transformative enough. The series is forcing me to, put it to good use. At least something each week, learn something, try something. And, then my hope is that will last for, 52 weeks.
sure, sure, absolutely. Well, you're doing a fantastic job of these, and I can tell just by reading your posts in the comments, people are loving these. I know you're getting a lot of impressions with these, so congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun.
All right. Well, you know, just to end this, with us both being from Cherry Beckert, if someone wants to get started on their AI journey, we have those services. Can you give a plug for those and just kind of talk about what those are and or maybe what someone should do if they're interested?
Yeah, I would say the one thing I've been trying to encourage people to do is just have a conversation. I'd love to talk to anyone who's interested in getting started, because the one thing that I feel, as a technology professional, we have not done our clients a great service when we talk about agentic AI. The reality is we're barely literate in AI, but yet we're already talking about what I'd call AI abdication, abdicating work to an AI agent that we barely understand. So, what I've been trying to encourage people is literacy before agency. Let's have a conversation about what you're doing today. Begin to point people in the direction of things they could try, places they could start. And then the other thing I have been talking to people about is personal transformation before organizational. It's really hard to talk about how AI is going to transform your organization if you haven't done any of your own work. It hasn't transformed anything in your job yet. So, personal before organizational, literacy before agency. And then another important part, if you do get to the point where you're ready to begin experimenting or rolling this out within your organization, data governance is huge. Because what a lot of people don't realize is once you turn on AI in your organization, if you haven't done any work around security, labeling, helping your AI understand what's confidential information, what's not, what it should access and what it shouldn't, people really are woefully unprepared for what they unleash when they turn an AI LLM or AI agent loose against their network, against their data, if they haven't done any of the work around labeling and data governance. So that is definitely a place we are encouraging people to start. And we've got a team that focuses on that here at Cherry Beckert, helping people make those thoughtful decisions about how you don't inadvertently open up the world to all of your most sensitive confidential documents because you haven't done the work ahead of time of kind of labeling and educating AI what it should do with what information.
Yeah, yeah, those are very, very valid points. Um, well, Greg, I really appreciate your time today. This was a great conversation. I'd like to get with you again in the future and talk about some of your other blogs. I know you have a lot more to say about this topic, so thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. It's been a pleasure. Look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And for our listeners out there, if you want to go check out Greg's blogs, you can go to LinkedIn. In the search, just look up Greg, and then he spells his last name Kaupp, and look him up, read those blogs. I think you'll get a whole lot out of them. So thanks for joining us today.